We'll go back on schedule here. Nellie McAdams, who is in charge of the Oregon Agricultural Trust. Did I get that right? Yep. Okay. And she'll tell you your background because I'll probably screw it up. But anyway.
Thank you, John, and thank you to the entire board. It's really an honor to be here with you, especially after following your work for so many years as well. I'm also just sad to not see my friend and colleague, Jim Johnson. I learned something new from him every single time, so I hope that you get to see him at a future meeting as well. As John said, I represent the Oregon Agricultural Trust, or OAT is our acronym, and our mission is to partner with Oregon farmers and ranchers to protect and pass on their land for future generations. So tonight, I'm going to share a little bit about my story and why I do this work in the first place. Then I'll talk a little bit about the main tool that we use, which is a working land easement. I'll also speak to the policy that Representative Prusak mentioned as well, and talk a little bit about how we do our work to help landowners preserve their land and legacies. But first, I want to know who all's in the room. So if you wouldn't mind raising your hand if you're a farmer, rancher, or forester. How about if your parents were farmers, ranchers, or foresters? Keep your hands raised, everybody. Keep your hands raised if you're grandparents. How about an ancestor anywhere along the line? So it's pretty much all of us. We all have a connection to the land in some way. I think it moves us in our hearts to see open space and to know that our nourishment is coming from that area. So, the reason that I do this work is really because of this farm here. This is my grandfather's farm that he purchased in the Great Depression. He earned enough money as a farm laborer to put together 3 different homesteads, about 400 acres, and build a life for himself and his family. And I say that because he was probably one of the last generations that could make enough money as a farm laborer to purchase agricultural land. Right now, agricultural land values are far beyond what you can often float off of a farm income. And in part, that's because of development speculation and investors who are purchasing agricultural land from PERS in California or PERS in Canada and other companies, because it's a better long-term investment than the stock market, especially in times like these. So my grandfather was able to create this stability for his family. My dad was a farmer as well as an estate attorney, which is always handy to have in the family. You get a lot of pro bono legal service that way. And he started planning for my grandparents' estate about 20 years before they passed. And one of the things that he started looking at was, how was he going to pay off his 2 sisters? This property was worth around $4 million, and my grandfather wanted to divide it up 3 ways, the assets. So while my dad was going to inherit over $1 million when his father died, he was also going to inherit about $3 million of debt if he wanted to pay off his sisters and purchase this land. So what he did in looking at all of the land that we owned was he looked at one parcel, about 80 acres, that was farther away from the main parcel that we farm. And during 2004, when there was a lapse in our land use program due to Measure 37, he applied for Measure 37 rights to subdivide those 80 acres into 5-acre lots. He did not do that because he wanted to see that land developed, and none of us can even drive by it at this point. It just breaks our heart. The farmers around it are unable to farm in the same way that they could before because of the increased traffic. He did that because it would increase the value of that property about 4 or 5 times. That property could then go to my aunts, and he would only be $1 million in debt to them. So I began to wonder if people like my dad, who have a second income and who have the ability to do legal strategy, are having to make sacrifices and sell and sacrifice the back 40 every generation. What are other farmers having to do? How are they able to afford estate tax? How are they able to pay off the non-farming heirs? How are they able to pay off the debts? And so that's when I began to look at ways where farmers and ranchers could earn an income, not by developing the property, but by selling the development rights that exist on that property, or a working land easement. So a working land easement is a conservation easement that preserves the agricultural values of that property as well. You can still farm, ranch, and harvest timber off of that property. In legal terms, a conservation easement is a voluntary legal agreement between a landowner and an organization like a land trust or soil and water conservation district to permanently remove the development rights on that property, to limit them, and to preserve it for conservation, which can include agriculture. How does this work? So, for any attorneys in the room, we always think about property, our elected officials too, as a bundle of sticks. You know, it's not just a plot of soil, it is your mining rights underneath that soil, it is whatever subdivision rights you have on that soil, any ability to build homes, schools, rear strips, any of the 60 different exceptions to exclusive farm use that exist in statute in Oregon. I think in Oregon, we like to rest on our laurels and think that the land use program is preventing the loss of agricultural land. But over time, in fact, there's an average of one non-farm use that's allowed on exclusive farm use land that's been allowed every legislative session since the program was created. And that creates, over time, a death by 1,000 cuts to the program. And while it slowed the loss of our agricultural land, it has by no means stopped it. In fact, between just 5 years in the last agricultural census, between 2012 and 2017, we lost 340,000 acres from agricultural production. And that's about the size of 3 Portlands. And for the 40,000 acres that we lost in the Portland metro area, most of that was probably lost to subdivision and development, is what Oregon Department of Agriculture estimates. So not all of it was developed, but it was taken out of production during that time. So when we look at a property, we'll look at all of those bundle of sticks. Do you have any Measure 49 rights that exist on your property? Could you build a school? Could you subdivide it in any other way? And we identify the rights, the development rights that you don't want to keep on the property, the rights that might interfere with your ability to farm that property. So here, those are sort of marked in green. And those sticks from your bundle, you can sell to a land trust like us. And we hold those rights and make sure that you or any of the people who own that property after you do not use those development rights. So you still own the underlying property, so you can still pass it on to your heirs, you can still sell it. It's just that any future owners cannot develop it in the ways that you have just restricted it with us. What is the value of those property rights? So I've said that we pay landowners for those property rights, or you can receive a charitable tax deduction. But how do we calculate that? How do we know what the value of rights that you haven't even used is? That's actually determined by 2 different appraisals. So you do a before appraisal of what the property is worth right now with all of those property rights on it. So in this example, the property might be worth $1 million, including any Measure 49 rights or subdivision rights. Maybe after you restrict those rights and remove those rights, it's only worth, here in this example, $600,000. The value of the easement is then the difference between those 2 appraisals. In this example, it's $400,000. So it's the value of the property rights you're giving up. An easement does lower the appraised value of a property. So in some ways that can be great if you want to sell that property to a beginning farmer or rancher who couldn't otherwise afford it. It does not take away your net assets. You're just converting some of your real estate into cash and getting cash for your real estate without having to sell your real estate, if that makes sense, through an easement. And that's both for a sale and a donation. So, you know, for example, for my family, the upper example is what we did, which is sell off a parcel of property for cash. With an easement, instead of selling off a parcel of property, you sell off development rights that you wouldn't use anyways. You receive cash for not using those development rights, and you make that land more affordable to the next generation of farmer and rancher. So why would you convey an easement? You know, to keep that land permanently available for agriculture. In the easements that we do, agriculture is always an allowed use on the property. We're here to support the agricultural economy, which is the second largest economy in the state. You protect it from subdivision and development, and you can also preserve any conservation values like riparian areas on that property that you want to preserve. You can receive financial benefits, such as cash for your real estate without having to sell and give up use of your real estate. You can receive a tax deduction, which I'll talk about in a second. And you can reduce your family's burden, your heirs' burden, in paying estate taxes by reducing the value of your overall estate if you donate an easement as well. You can also use that funding for paying attorney fees or estate tax. And actually, your heirs can donate an easement or sell an easement after you have passed, and those same benefits can pass to your heirs at that time too. Now, I mentioned that you get money, but where does that money come from? There is a great program that is managed by the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Natural Resource Conservation Service. It's called ASAP-AL. There's so many acronyms here, I just don't want to enumerate them all. But it is a program that pays landowners usually for 50% of the value of that easement. So in that example that I gave before where the easement was worth $400,000, this federal program could pay half of that, or $200,000 in most cases. And in the Stafford Hamlet, that would be the same rules that would apply. It's a very well-funded program and it has strong bipartisan support. So, 50% could come from that federal program. A significant portion, actually more than 25% now, could come from landowner donation. But a missing chunk of that puzzle has always been non-federal cash, which this program has required as match. So about 28 other states have a match program that's specifically designed to partner with that federal program and to bring in millions of dollars in revenue to their farmers and ranchers. In Oregon, the state legislature created the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program in 2017. This is a program that would provide up to a 75% match of the easement value. However, it is currently unfunded, and the states that do have funded easement programs are able to bring in about 4 times as much cash. So, for example, Delaware, tiny Delaware, has brought in 10 times as much from this federal program as Oregon has without a federal match. I mentioned that there was an income tax incentive as well. So for landowners who are farmers or ranchers, so if you make more than 50% of your income from farming and ranching, you can take 100% of that easement value. So in my example, that was $400,000 in your tax credit. But say you don't have $400,000 in taxable income in that year that you donate that easement. Well, according to the federal program, you can actually spread that deduction out over 15 years. So you can work with your accountant. And if there are years when you don't have income, just don't take that credit. The years that you do have income, you can decide how much of that credit you want to take. So you can take a charitable tax deduction for all or part of the easement value. That's something a land trust would work with you to meet your goals on. As I mentioned, it can also reduce the value of the estate. So Oregon has one of the most onerous estate taxes in the nation. It kicks in at estates worth over $1 million, and I know of no farms that are worth less than $1 million. There is a natural resources tax credit, which for farmers and ranchers who are passing it on to a family member, they can take a credit and pay less in their estate tax, but maybe you don't have a family member who's taking it over. Then you will have a significant estate tax burden, and conveying a working land easement can help reduce that. So what actually happens? I've been talking a lot in sort of general terms about what an easement is and how it's funded. What happens when you want to start conveying an easement is you hire an attorney and an accountant who are well-versed in this, and you can speak with me or the Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts in order to find trained professionals. And then you choose an easement holder. Clackamas County is lucky that their Soil and Water Conservation District also holds working land easements and has an excellent land legacy program. And you can speak with us too if that is not a correct fit. You then look at the property and figure out what property rights you have on it and which ones you would like to convey. And then you draft and negotiate an easement. So that's done with a conservation director, which I should have mentioned, we just launched in January, so we haven't hired ours yet. But as soon as we do, they would be the person that you would have that conversation with. Until that point, you can have it with me. And then after you've signed an easement agreement, what happens next is annual monitoring. So someone from the Land Trust or Soil and Water Conservation District would come to your property every year. They would announce and plan that with you. They don't do surprise visits unless there's a reason to believe that they need to. But they would just walk the property with you and just make sure that that easement is being followed. That's the promise that they've made to you. That's the commitment that they made to keep forever on your property. And they take that very seriously. And so they will work with you to make sure that the easement is being kept. If there is any change that the landowner has made to the land, usually the easement holder tries to mediate those concerns first, but enforcement can be taken. That hasn't happened very much in Oregon so far, but we haven't had many easements so far too. My organization, Oregon Agricultural Trust, we serve the entire state, but we especially serve areas that are underserved by other easement holders. So that includes large portions of the Willamette Valley, and especially areas that are in threat of development and have prime soils. So we just launched this year, and our office is in Salem, co-housed with Marion Soil and Water Conservation District. Not only do we hold easements, we receive donated lands as well. We can put an easement on it and sell the property to a beginning farmer or rancher or do a long-term lease with them. We also provide technical assistance to other organizations that want to hold working land easements. We provide education like we're doing today, but also to accountants and appraisers and attorneys and all of the professionals who get to work with a landowner to make sure that they can meet your needs. And then we advocate for programs like the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program. I do have an example here. Rich, do I have time for that, or am I? Go for it? Okay. So this is an example from the Yamhill Soil and Water Conservation District, which has actually been one of the most successful easement holders in the state. Larry Oyua there has been very effective. This farmer, rancher, and forester who you see here, Lucian Gunderman, was the third generation on his family farm of 720 acres just outside of McMinnville. It's a beautiful property I've been to. But he was the only child, and he had no children of his own. When his mother died, Lucian had to pay $300,000 in estate tax. And this is a burden that many farmers and ranchers are familiar with and can really break the bank. Farmers and ranchers are land rich, cash poor. And so where do you come up with that cash? Lucian thought that he could either harvest timber on his property or sell all or part of the farm to be developed, probably into the areas around McMinnville. But he didn't do either one of those. And that's because he'd been planning for years ahead and having conversations with Larry Oyua. I should say that these negotiations aren't quick. They're not over in a week. It usually takes a couple years. That's if we're going to get funding in. If it's a donated easement, it can take more like 6 months. But it is something that the easement holder wants to think about and wants to make sure that you as the landowner are really sure that you want to enter as well. So Lucian sold an easement protecting 420 acres of the farm and ranch and 300 acres of his forest. And he used this cash that he'd already acquired to pay off his estate taxes and his attorney. That property now, is now passing to Alex, who is the son of Lucian's best friend, who had been learning along Lucian's side ever since he was a boy. And Lucian and his mom, before she passed, sat Alex down one day and said, Lucian, Alex, where do you see yourself in 20 years? And he said, I love this place so much, I can't see myself anywhere else. And Lucian said, well, let's make that happen. And so he is a member of, Lucian and Alex are in the same trust, and that property will pass on to Alex after Lucian passes. So, These tools have benefits for conservation, but I don't want to underestimate the human impacts that they can have as well. And if we want to have local food, we need local farmers. And how are they going to be able to access land, especially if they're first generation? You have to inherit money or inherit the farm these days in order to really buy it, especially in an area around an urban area. So we hope that this can be a tool. So I'll just end there. If there are any questions, yeah, Ken.
One, using your $1 million property with a $400,000 sale, is there a income or capital gains obligation on the $400,000? Is my first question.
There is. However, you can use a 1031 exchange, and a number of farmers in Skagit County do that with income that they receive from the easement to actually expand their business.
The second question is that you've reduced the value of the property to $600,000. Does that get you a lower property tax bill from your local county property tax assessor?
It does not affect county tax rolls because the county properties are specially assessed. So it's still the special assessment still applies, and that formula isn't changed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
The farmer matching, young farmer with
Yeah.
retiring farmer. I think it started 30 years ago in Nebraska. The farm study program was awesome. Young farmers not even having money to buy, and they work their way into it if they gain trust with the farmer. Is that a robust program that your group or other groups could match make folks if they wanted to get a young farmer in here and have them kind of work into the farm?
There is actually an online program now called Oregon Farm Link that does that kind of land linking. So that program exists, and there's conversations with other service providers about how to make that more robust. Just this year, we did a pilot program where we had hands-on service for one landowner and one land seeker, really trying to help them navigate the entire process. It's hard, It's hard, for elder farmers who might not want to use a computer in order to put all their personal information and find someone. But then even once you've made the match, no one is a born mentor or a born mentee. And so how you negotiate that relationship can always use a little bit of hand-holding and support. And so that's what I think a lot of the organizations that I'm lucky to work with are looking at.
The other question for you is, it looks like there's no funding for you or the bigger program from the state. So if that is a gap to maybe 25% or 50%, has anybody been using transfer development rights or conservation cluster developments where you're clustered in a small spot and use those funds to pay for the easement?
Right. So our organization does have funding, capacity building funding. Probably most of the easements we would be working with would be at least partial donation and maybe a combination with that federal program. The federal program has plenty of money. Its funding was actually almost doubled in the last Farm Bill. We have 2 more years at that funding level, and I hope that it will at least stay the same. So that program is well funded and poised to be leveraged by this state. In terms of transfer of development rights, as far as I'm aware, the only statute in Oregon allowing transfer of development rights is specific to Measure 49 rights, and that has to include an inter-county agreement with sending and receiving areas, so transferring Measure 49 rights into a more dense urban area. So that's more of a intergovernmental decision, and we might be involved in providing technical assistance and support there, but it's not something that we can facilitate directly.
And how much money do you get now starting out?
Our budget?
Not enough.
Yeah, never enough.
Not enough?
Well, we have definitely sufficient capital for a startup. Yes.
So I have 2 questions. Is there a minimum size for doing this conservation easement with agricultural land? And if you want to do an easement on a smaller piece of property, isn't there some other way you can do it?
So the question is there a minimum size for doing a conservation easement? And if you want to do an easement on a smaller piece of property, is there a different way aside from easements where you could make that same, have that same effect? So there technically is no minimum size for a conservation easement. However, my costs as an organization are pretty much fixed for every transaction we do. So whether it's a 5-acre parcel or a 5,000-acre parcel, My staff, and all of the attorneys that we would hire are going to be paying around $50,000. So for us, like, that would have to be a pretty compelling project that would have very significant community impact if it was on a smaller scale. We have not set a minimum in terms of our organization, but we're doing strategic planning right now. I doubt we'll have such rigid numbers, but it would have to rank very, very highly in other ways. In terms of other ways of permanently protecting land, I don't know of them, to be honest. The land use program provides great protection in this time frame, for the time frame that that zoning is in place, but that zoning can be changed pretty much at any time. For easements, you can't hold an easement yourself and just sort of write it into the will that it's protected, because who's going to enforce that against future owners of the property? That's unenforceable. So I wish I knew of other ways that this could be done, but this is the main way that I know of. Les?
Your example of a retiring farmer turning it over to a young farmer, would the young farmer's personality here be the same way of looking at it if it was an organization, whether it be a farm trust or a farm organization that wants to actively farm as an organization?
How you sell or transfer or manage the property is up to you. If you partner with a land trust, it's really as flexible as you want to make it. If you want our land trust to help you in that search for a landowner, that's something that we could certainly do. But there's no restriction on it being farmed by an individual, a sole proprietor, a corporation. There's no restriction on who actually does the agriculture. I want to let you know that you're always welcome to reach out to me as well. I have a sign-in over there. I have some 2-pagers about our organization, and I also have 2-pagers about a program offered by the Clackamas Small Business Development Center. Diana Turney there does farm succession counseling at a very, very low cost. She is an incredible counselor, and at the end of a year, you end up with a succession plan. So I just want to promote that as well, and I have her flyers out front. But thank you again for having me, and thank you for your great questions.
Thanks a lot.